Well, after reading Stephen Charnock for over a year now, I'm finally ready to review the first volume, just the first volume, of Stephen Charnock's The Existence and Attributes of God. I've only finished this first volume, still working in the second one, but I thought I would go ahead and review it, just because people have been requesting this, and I did finish the first one quite a little while ago now. So this is 736 pages, the first volume is. And before I say anything else about the book, I wanted to talk about the beauty that Crossway has created here. They have really done a work with these books. They're absolutely stunning. There's the gold leafing. There's this beautiful, instead of cloth binding or just a normal paper hardcover, it's this faux leather. I think it's the same leather they use on their Bibles that they call True Tone. It's absolutely stunning. There's all this gold leafing on it. This pattern on the front here matches what is on the paste-down liner inside the book. And it's just truly stunning. It's hardcover, as I mentioned. It's Smith sewn, which helps it stand open more evenly and sustainably, and will also help preserve the life of the book. So these are truly bound to last a very, very long time. Before I go any further, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Davis, and here on Petra Publications, I mostly just review Reformed Christian books. And if that sounds like something you're interested in, I'd love to have you join us by subscribing down below. And if you've been following for a while, links to our donation page where you can donate just a one-time donation or sign up for a subscription down below. Thank you so much for your support. Before we go into the book review proper, I'll give some information on Stephen Charnock, since we haven't done anything with Stephen Charnock on the channel before. He was born in 1628, and he died in 1680. Charnock is best known for the work that we're reviewing today, The Existence and Attributes of God, but he's also written other works, such as his treatise on regeneration, which was also recently republished. And he was one of the most prominent English Puritans of the 17th century, and was a Presbyterian clergyman. Charnock studied at Emmanuel College, Cambridge, where he was influenced by Puritan theology. In the short biography in this volume, William Symington, if that's how you pronounce his name, on page 20, said this, and I think this sums up really well who Charnock was. Not only was his acquaintance with the original languages of Scripture great, but he had made considerable attainments in the study of medicine. Indeed, there was scarcely any branch of learning with which he was unacquainted. All his mental powers were thus strengthened and refined by judicious discipline, and, as we shall see presently, he knew well how to devote his treasures, whether original or acquired, to the service of the Redeemer, and to consecrate the richest stores of natural genius and educational attainment by laying them at the foot of the cross. And I think that really is what you see within this volume. And there's another quote that Symington says that I wanted to read in this part of the review. On page 22, he says, "But his best and most highly cherished companions were his books, of which he had contrived to secure a valuable though select collection, and with these he held frequent and familiar intercourse." And again, that's something that you see throughout these volumes, is that he truly knew his books. He had read so much. He had studied so much. And it's just so apparent throughout the book. And I couldn't find any information on whether Charnock was ever married or had children, but his legacy lives on to this day, especially with this beautiful edition published by Crossway. And again, I'll just show you this. They're a little bit expensive. Links in the description down below to a set of this on sale from Reformation Heritage, but they are worth every penny that you put into them. Let's go ahead and dive into the book review proper, talking about Volume 1. And this book is split into discourses, and I hope that Charnock did not preach all of these discourses in one sitting, or each discourse individually in one sitting, because I could not have sat through any of them. They're incredibly long. Some of them reaching into the 130 pages mark, whereas the average sermon, I think, is around 15 pages. So incredibly, incredibly long. So I sincerely hope that he split them up and did them that way. I would not have gotten much out of them trying to read the whole thing at once. As I've been reading them, I split them into about 10 pages a day, which is why it's taking me so long to get through them. There's a lot of pages here, but yeah, 10 pages a day was enough for me. But anyway, Charnock writes a total of 14 discourses, which I'll read for you in just a moment. And in this volume, we have the first 8 of these discourses. And Mark Jones did the church a great service by editing this work. This edition is updated, but it is not abridged, which is incredible, a very important thing. The amount of editorial work that Jones did, however, is huge. One of the first things that I said to myself when I opened the first volume and began reading it was just, wow, this must have taken an entire lifetime. Like, he must have been working on this since he was born. The amount of editorial work done here is incredible. In total, Mark Jones in his introduction says that he made 20 editorial changes. And some of the biggest or most noticeable ones are that he fixed the run-on sentences. Number headings have been fixed, archaic words updated, insertion of biblical and quotational references, and this is huge. There are so many of these references. Things that Charnock just said, as so-and-so said, maybe a last name. Mark Jones was able to come in and find that reference and put it in the footnotes. Massive, massive help. I don't know how he did it, but he did. British spelling to American, which I enjoy. And, of course, his introductions to every discourse, which discusses what Charnock will say, and it also puts everything in historical context. So every discourse Mark Jones introduces. He has 5 or 6 pages on this new discourse. Here's what he's going to say. He breaks it down. He puts the main points in a small area so that you can see them. Once you get into Charnock, it's a little hard to follow where he's going with all of his footnotes and all of his subheadings and all of these things. So the introduction really frames it for you so that you understand where he's going. It also sort of says, here are the historical controversies that are happening right now. Here's why he's saying this. Here's why he's addressing this problem that's not really an issue today. But most of the things that Mark Jones did that I just mentioned result in hundreds and hundreds of footnotes, which are extremely helpful. All of the archaic words, most of them weren't actually changed. Nothing was changed in the text itself, but rather he updated them by putting a footnote right underneath it that says this word actually means this. And so you're actually reading exactly what Charnock wrote outside of being able to understand it. And also all of the references that I mentioned. All of these quotes that he found the reference to. And those are extremely helpful. All of these different things end up in footnotes. And so each discourse has several hundred footnotes. And very, very helpful stuff there. And Joel Beakey, in his little blurb about this book, said this. Lightly edited for the modern reader and studded with insightful introductions to each discourse, this new edition by Mark Jones will be a great help to all who seek diligently to know the Lord. And that is so true. And I should have probably prefaced this review with that quote. It is truly helpful, and it truly does help you if you seek diligently to know the Lord. This truly is a beautiful set that has been made to last not just your lifetime, but your children's and your grandchildren's lifetimes as well, if they are taken care of. I'll go ahead and read the table of contents for you so you get an idea of which attributes and doctrines he's dealing with here. First, there's the editor's introduction, which I referenced earlier. Then there's the life and character of Stephen Charnock by William Symington, which I also mentioned earlier. Then each one of these, as I also mentioned earlier, there's an editor's summary of the discourse before the discourse, but I'm not going to read that every time. So there's on God's existence, on practical atheism, on God's being a spirit, on spiritual worship, on the eternal God, on the immutability of God, on God's omnipresence, and on God's knowledge. And that is what you have in this first volume. I'll go ahead and read some quotes from the book so that you get an idea of how Charnock writes and what is in this book. So my first quote is actually from the introduction by Mark Jones of Discourse number 1. This is on page 37. He says, "We can no more stop inquiry into the nature and existence of God among mankind as we can stop being human." It's so essential to our humanity to inquire of God and his attributes. Page 42, this is now Charnock speaking on the existence of God. He says, "When men deny the God of purity, they must be polluted in soul and body and grow brutish in their actions. When the sense of religion is shaken off, all kinds of wickedness are eagerly rushed into, whereby they become as loathsome to God as petrified carcasses are to men." Hard words, but true. On page 65, still in the existence of God, he says, "Fear is the consequent of wickedness." And I think that's so important to remember as we have anxiety and fear. That the only reason we fear at all is the consequent of sin. And that's painful, yet true. Page 68, still on God's existence, he says, "Those things," actually this is quoting Aquinas, who I don't normally like, but I liked this quote. "Those things that are good must flow from something perfectly good. That which is chief in any kind is the cause of all that kind. Fire, which is most hot, is the cause of all things which are hot. There is some being, therefore, which is the cause of all that perfection which is in the creature, and that is God." It sounds a lot like Plato, but anyway. Page 80. This is still on God's existence. He says, "Since man knows he is an imperfect being, he must suppose the perfections he wants are seated in some other being, which has limited him and upon which he depends." Again, still very much like Plato. Page 92. He says, "Can we behold the spider's nets, or silkworm's web, the bee's closets, or the ant's granaries, without acknowledging a higher being than the creature who has planted that genius in them?" That's so good. It sort of reminds me of Spurgeon saying, you need to get out and view nature. You need to see things to appreciate the creativity of God. Page 106, he says, "Every man's conscience testifies that he is unlike what he ought to be, according to that law engraved in his heart." Again, very true. Page 109, he says, "Conscience is the foundation of all religion, and the two pillars upon which it is built are the being of God and the bounty of God to those who diligently seek him." Amen to that. And page 115, there are two quotes, basically right in a row here, that I wanted to read. He says, "Folly is the disturber of families, cities, nations, the disgrace of human nature." And then he goes on to say, "It demolishes all order in nations. The being of God is the guard of all of the world. The sense of God is the foundation of civil order. Without this, there is no tie upon the consciences of men." I think that's very helpful as we're entering a voting season ourselves. Page 123. By confessing God, I venture no loss, but by denying him I run the most desperate hazard, if there is one. That's very good. Page 128. To deny him a worship is as great a folly as to deny his being. We could have used a quote like that a few years ago when all the churches were shut down too. Page 141. This is now on practical atheism. Where there is no reverence of God in the life, it is easily concluded that there is less in the heart. Painful, but true. Page 176, he says, the law of God orders one thing. The heart of man desires another. Our natural hearts are so contrary to the law of God that we, in fact, go the opposite direction. Page 252, still on practical atheism, he says, we can have no delight and meditation on him unless we know him, and we cannot know him but by the means of his own revelation. How important it is to know the Word of God. Page 266, on God's being a spirit, he says, the creature has a body as well as a soul, and both from God, and therefore ought to worship God with the one as well as the other, since one as well as the other is freely bestowed upon him. Page 288. Oops, wrong page. 288. He says, this is still on God's being a spirit, God is a simple, infinite, immense, eternal, invisible, incorruptible being. I really like that a lot. Page 317. He says this, how is it possible then for any man who knows his own nature to think that extended hands, bended knees, and lifted up eyes were sufficient acts of worship without a quickened and active spirit? That was on spiritual worship. Page 328. He says, the matter of worship is spiritual. It consists in love of God, faith in God, recourse to his goodness, meditation on him, and communion with him. It lays aside ceremonial, spiritualizes the moral. A very helpful thing there. Let's see, where am I here? 3. All right, I'm going to go to 443. Skipping forward a good little bit here. This is on the eternity of God. He says, the enjoyment of God will be as fresh and glorious after many ages as when it was at first. God is eternal, and eternity knows no change. There will then be the fullest possession without any decay, and the object enjoyed. Amen to that. It's very similar to the last verse of Amazing Grace. Page 483, on the immutability of God. He says, if his understanding and his essence were not one and the same, he were not simple but compounded. If compounded, he would consist of parts. If he consisted of parts, he would not be an independent being, and so would not be God. Page 637. He says, he exactly numbers all the devices and inclinations of men, as men do every piece of coin they tell out of a heap. It's very good. And finally, on page 707, to close out this review, he says, this is on God's knowledge. He says, by invocation of creatures, that's the subheading title, praying to saints by the Romanists is a disparagement to this divine excellency. He who knows all things is only fit to have the petitions of men presented to him. Yeah. Pray to Jesus Christ and not to men. Well, that will conclude this review. Hopefully within a few more months I'll finish Volume 2. I'm about halfway. You can see my bookmark there. Like I said, only doing about 10 pages a day, which is enough for me. And yeah, Lord willing, I will get to this review before the end of the year. If you have any suggestions on reviews that you'd like to see or anything like that, comment those down below. I'd love to hear from you. And if this review was helpful to you in some shape, way, or form, also put that in the comments down below. I always love hearing your feedback and your questions and comments. But that will do it for this video. That's all I have for you today. And Lord willing, I will see you again very soon. God bless. Bye.